Hello again, dear viewers, and welcome to the third installment of my stupid idea to complete Factorio's planets from nothing. And today, it's time for the planet I've been dreading since this series sprung into my brain, Gleba. Just like before, I'll be starting with no research and only the few starting items you get on any new Factorio run. And a quick reminder on the rules, this run is considered complete once I have a fully automated base producing at least 90 SPM of every available science, and a spaceship capable of safely traveling between the inner planets. And spoiler alert, getting to these goals won't be as simple as on Volcana or Fulgora. Shockingly, the early game starts out with hitting rocks, but thankfully these ones are very quick to mine and give lots of raw resources. Also picking up some jelly nut, since it's by far the best fuel source available on Gleba with its 10 megajoule fuel value. And if you look to your right, you'll see wild pentapods in their natural habitat, shortly before they become a massive pain in my behind. After collecting as much ore as I can carry, it's time to set up some smelting. A lot of my time at this stage in the game will be spent running around collecting resources, so the earlier I can set up an automated starter base, the better. Thankfully, if all you want is some slow science production, the infrastructure is pretty minimal. One mixed iron and copper belt is all you'll need. And now I can comfortably focus on my role as a walking mining drill while my base chews through the essential research in the background. I'll be cutting most of this out of the video, but out of the first hour of this playthrough, maybe 40 minutes were spent just doing this. Run back to base, empty my inventory, and repeat. And to show a sneak peek of another problem this run is gonna have, this is what stone patches look like on Gleba. You can fit maybe around 8 miners on each patch, and they only contain about 100 to 150,000 stone, which is laughably bad. Now, it might seem all good so far, but going around plundering every stromatolite and jelly nut tree is not a sustainable strategy. And if I want a more permanent solution to the resource problem, I'll need to destroy some pentapod nests for their eggs. And compared to early game biters, these things are ridiculous. Just 5 of them came close to killing me even through heavy armor. For context, this is how much damage 5 small biters do when you're wearing heavy armor. And that's just the wrigglers, which are by far the least threatening kind of pentapod. The Stompers have such ridiculous stats that they might as well be demolishers that actually attack your base. But for the moment I don't need to worry about Stompers. So with these eggs I gathered, it's time to make some biochambers. And if I set up the biochambers like this, we can get at least some automation just as long as I don't forget to hand feed fruits. Biochambers are extremely cheap compared to other planet-specific buildings, which is great because you end up needing lots of these things for even a trickle of resources on Gleba. The main thing we need is bioflux, and since we're limited to only yellow belts, direct insertion of mash and jelly is optimal, since even a full yellow belt of either processed fruit can only support 3 machines making bioflux. I really don't think Gleba was meant to be done with yellow belts. Other than that, it's the standard Gleba problems. Make sure there's enough nutrients to keep the biochambers chugging, and have a way to clear spoilage from anywhere it might back up. But of course, I don't have the luxury of full automation in this run yet, so the whole process has to be hand-fed. But it's a start. Now that I have bioflux, it's time to start building an actually functional base. This is the design I came up with for smelting. The only input is bioflux, and from there it'll fuel itself and breed bacteria that gets buffered into chests and taken out to be smelted when it spoils into ore. And here's me replanting trees by hand, just in case you were in danger of forgetting that I'm playing this automation game completely wrong. The only problem with the smelter is that I didn't put any way to start or restart bacteria production, so let's hope it doesn't die too many times. For now, the best way to fuel furnaces is still just using jelly nut, but that'll have to change later, since burning jelly nut unsurprisingly doesn't give you back any seeds for replanting. But now that I have a somewhat automated smelting setup, I can finally start setting up a base with an actual mall and stop handcrafting all my supplies. Well, right after I go pick some fruits by hand again. I'll also need lots of landfill, so I make this little monstrosity on one of my 2 available stone patches. Once that's set up, I finally decide to bite the bullet and attempt to fully automate the farming process. And let me tell you, routing yellow belts through the swamp with no robots and a limited amount of landfill is a special kind of torture. But eventually I manage to get the belts where they need to go, and the farming can begin. And of course I then remember that I have no robots to carry the seeds back to the towers, so it's time for another belt. I also made a little setup just to process jelly nut and shove it in a chest to spoil, That's because I was in real danger of running out of jelly nut seeds with how little is being processed compared to how much I'm burning for fuel and power. Then I try fueling my furnaces with spoilage, but even the more fuel efficient steel furnaces still go through spoilage too fast for it to be a viable fuel source. Another smelting stack over here since I need steel, and I'm actually surprised it took this long into the run for some absolutely horrendous spaghetti to show up. And then my power dies, because I was too busy actually making progress in the game and forgot to refuel my boilers. Well, the only way out of the hand-feeding nightmare is to do research, so here's red and green science again. And the labs, and some concrete for later. And I wasn't sure how good of an idea this was, but I finally split the jelly nut belt off to automatically fuel the boilers. Let's hope I don't burn too much fruit and run out of seeds. Alright, so if I want any chance of completing this run, I'll need blue science, but currently my bioflux isn't keeping up, so I doubled the fruit processing, then I set up engines, and I'm almost out of biochambers, which I need to get literally any amount of raw resource, so I set up a small egg breeding into biochamber setup and... Yup, it looks like I took too long with my base and my spore cloud reached the pentapod nests. Now, it's time for a bit of real talk. I'm gonna go decently in depth on why this run was almost impossible, so if you wanna skip ahead to where the run continues, go to this timestamp. So, why is Gleba so much of a jump in difficulty to start on compared to other planets? Strafer and Stomper pentapods are so strong that if you come here with no prior research, defending against them is pretty much impossible. If an attack wave containing even a single Stomper is attacking your base, the only thing you can do is sit there watching them destroy all the buildings you spent so long mining resources by hand for. While it is possible to kill Stompers even with no tech, you would need a similar amount of gun turrets and ammo to what it takes to kill a Demolisher on Volcanus. And unlike Volcanus, resources here have a very real cost. Even the less than a yellow belt worth of each fruit I was farming until now made the spore cloud big enough to reach the closest egg rafts. And that's just a few hours into the run, before expansion and evolution even have much of a chance to make it worse. Obviously, you might be thinking, you need better defenses than just gun turrets. Well, to get better defenses, I need military science. And what does military science need? Stone and coal. Each military science pack needs 5 coal and 10 stone. And we already saw what the stone patches look like on Gleba.
Ooh, that's kind of small.
And if that wasn't bad enough, there's no coal whatsoever. The only way to get coal on Gleba is using the coal synthesis recipe, which is straight up horrible. 5 carbon and 1 sulfur for a single piece of coal. And the only way to get carbon is with the burnt spoilage recipe. That doesn't sound too bad, right? Spoilage is a junk resource. Well, wrong. To get 1 carbon, you need 4 spoilage. That's taking into account the 50% productivity bonus on the biochambers. Which means 20 spoilage for each piece of coal, and a single science pack needs 5 coal. So 100 spoilage per science pack. And how many military science packs do we need to unlock, let's say, rocket turrets, which are pretty much the only way to deal with strafers and stompers on Gleba? Oh, not much, just 1,320 military science packs. That's 132,000 spoilage. And that's even ignoring the thousands of other science packs you'd need to get there. And need I remind you that just processing around 2 yellow belts of fruit for like an hour was enough to attract the stompers? And if all that wasn't bad enough, rocket turrets wouldn't even help. Without additional expensive rocket damage research, a yellow rocket shot by that turret does 200 damage. And how much health does a small stomper have? Just 3,500. So even after all of that, I would need 17 rockets for each stomper. And ignoring rocket turrets and going just for gun turret research isn't any better. To make gun turrets strong enough to defend against waves of stompers, we would need at least physical damage 5 and shooting speed 5 researches, which is a whopping 2,400 military science packs. So just 240,000 spoilage. And even that still wouldn't be a solid defense, since strafers exist and they just outrange gun turrets and kill them from afar. So to build an actually solid defense capable of dealing with the enemies that exist at the start of the game, we would need both strong gun turrets and rocket turrets. So yeah, only around 4,000 military science packs, which would be trivial to get in any normal run before coming to Gleba, even if it was your first planet, but pretty much impossible to achieve while starting on Gleba. So yeah, defending isn't feasible. and neither is attacking the nests to keep them away from the spore cloud. Since you guessed it, they're also guarded by multiple stompers and strafers, and surrounded by water, making turret creeping almost impossible. And remember, we have no personal equipment, so a few hits and we're dead. But let's say, hypothetically, that we just delete the pentapods. No more problems, right? Well, if you remember from the start of the video, the benchmark I set for this series was having a travel-capable spaceship and an automated 90 SPM base. If we ignore the existence of pentapods, the amount of fruit farming we need for iron, copper and oil products wouldn't matter. So with enough artificial soil, we would be fine. But there's still the stone and coal problem. The only science that needs coal is military, but to produce 90 military packs per minute you would need around 500 coal per minute, which is 10,000 spoilage per minute, and the amount of biochambers needed for that looks something like this. Oh, and just as a bonus, these biochambers would also eat 2500 nutrients per minute. So yeah, the base you would need to make this amount of spoilage consistently would probably be getting close to mega base scales. And I'm pretty sure I would run out of space to build on before I got close to the amount of coal I need. Because remember, most of Gleba is covered in swamp, which needs landfill. Which leads us to the next problem, stone. The stone patches on default settings Gleba are kind of pathetic. And as far as I can tell, they don't even get bigger as you go farther out from spawn, like on Novice. And even optimistically speaking, the stone patches you would get close to spawn would be around 500,000 stone in total, with a very tiny area as well to limit the amount of mining drills. Okay, so how much stone would we need for 90 SPM? Well, military science needs 900 stone per minute, and production science needs 1050 stone per minute. So let's round that up to 2000 stone per minute because the number is nicer. So that 500,000 stone, even if we ignore any that we would have depleted up until now for science, buildings, landfill, etc., would last us around 4 hours. And that's a pretty big highball. In most cases, you would have around 200 to 300,000 stone at your disposal, and would need to use a good chunk of that just building the base to start producing 90 SPM. That problem can kind of be ignored if you assume high enough mining productivity, but every mining productivity research past the second one starts requiring progressively more production science, which, you guessed it, needs stone. And all of that resource talk is in a perfect, utopian, peaceful Gleba world where the pentapods aren't destroying me for daring to harvest a yellow belt of fruit. Oof, that was a lot of ranting, even for me. Now you might think, with all that information, that the run is doomed. But obviously the video title isn't "Starting on Gleba is literally impossible." So let's dive back into the run and see how I'm gonna deal with all of this. Obviously, my first thought was that I kinda need that farming area, since it's the source of all my resources. So I go on a suicide mission to draw the pentapods away so I can restart my base. But like 5 minutes later another attack hits and I realized that sadly won't work. And with no resources coming in, I won't be making any progress. So I figured the only way back from this is to literally wait for my spore cloud to dissipate. So while I wait for that to very slowly happen, I started deconstructing my entire base by hand so I can build into something better. The current base was functional, but was already struggling with just red, green and a tiny amount of blue science. And right now I have only one idea that could solve all the problems I mentioned earlier at once. And that idea will need a more capable base. Once again, we start with bioflux production, this time enough to consume a full yellow belt of yomako fruits. After that, it's once again bacteria breeding. One yellow belt of copper definitely won't be enough, but I can only manage around this much bioflux production. And less than 3 yellow belts of iron would be even worse. Next up is the furnace stacks. Nothing fancy, 1 copper, 2 iron and 1 steel. And this is one of the few cases where building buffers for the resources is actually important. Since if the base idles, it'll back up the bacteria breeding and the entire base will shut down. The nutrients for all biochambers will be made by the single bioflux to nutrients machine. If you don't use any speed or prod modules in the biochambers, they actually eat very little nutrients. I'm also gonna need some oil products, and since Gleba has no oil, we'll need to use some of our precious bioflux to make sulfur and plastic. And can I go on a bit of a tangent and ask how exactly is the planet that is almost entirely covered in living organisms the one that has 0 coal and oil? Are we really supposed to believe that life on this planet is so abundant but somehow hasn't been around long enough to fossilize and become the environmentally friendly fossil fuels we all know and love? Immersion ruined, 0 out of 10 planet. Okay, tangent over, let's get back to building. Here's a tiny mall again. And finally, heating towers. They'll be my new way of powering the factory, much more efficient than boilers, and an effective way of getting rid of any unwanted biological material. Okay, this is taking a bit too long. Let's skip ahead to where the base is finished. This whole process took long enough that my spore cloud has pretty much completely disappeared, so I'll have a bit of time before the Stompers come ruin my day again. Now let's kickstart nutrient production and watch as the base comes online. Also, I figured the best and most sustainable way to fuel furnace stacks is using jelly. It still retains a pretty decent fuel value and eliminates the drawback of just burning unprocessed jelly nuts, which was eventually running out of seeds. And since spoilage by itself isn't enough to keep the heating towers working, I've hooked up an alarm to let me know if the steam tanks ever start running low, so I can run here and chuck some fruits into the fire to keep the base running. Even just a few minutes after starting to farm again, the spore cloud is already massive, so I really don't have much time to figure out a solution to my pentapod problem. Checking the pollution tab, I see that 3 egg rafts are already absorbing spores, so to buy myself some time, I deconstruct my agricultural towers and run halfway across the planet to handpick some fruits outside my spore cloud to keep the base running. I also place some radars around the farming area so I can keep track of forming attack waves. While it is in theory possible to just keep running across the map handpicking fruits until I get through all of blue science, just the idea makes me feel like closing the game and never opening it again. So I set up some quick hand-fed military science. With my base right now, getting any amount of military science is a slow and painful process. And need I remind you, slow right now is not an option. So what am I doing with this military science that'll let me escape this death spiral? Why, researching landmines, of course. So then I spend an hour watching for attack waves and quickly picking up my towers and all the seeds inside them when one is incoming. Because that really is how long it took me to get 100 military science packs needed for the research. But no one wants to watch that, so let's skip ahead to the most cursed idea to ever grace a Factorio run. What exactly am I gonna do with landmines? The explosives they need make them too expensive to use as a constant defensive measure. Well, you're right, but that's why I'm not gonna be using them defensively. These are offensive landmines. Just a few of these bad boys placed next to a pentapod nest will take it out, and quickly enough for it to actually be possible before I get stomped on. Oh yeah, did I forget to mention that pentapod egg rafts only spawn on areas that are in solid ground? Yup, I can't place landmines on most surfaces on Gleba. So did I just spend the last 90 minutes of my life struggling to get a useless item? No, because let me introduce you to the offensive landmine's best friend. Offensive landfill. Yes, that really is as stupid as it sounds. So here's the plan. I get in a car, both to be slightly faster and to service some extremely jank armor, and get close enough to landfill around the nests. Then I die, respawn, craft another car, grab my landmines and do the same thing again, but placing mines this time. Don't try this trick at home, kids. It's a lot harder than it looks. Mostly because you need to bait the Stompers away from the nest before placing landmines, else they just get destroyed before they get the chance to arm. But thankfully there's only like 2 nests near my spore cloud, so this only took like 40 attempts. I almost can't believe this ended up working. Now that the nests are gone, I've bought myself some much needed time, so let's restart the base again. And I've been doing some research while off on my stupid quest to landmine under the pentapod's houses. So let's start buffering some advanced materials, like LDS and rocket fuel. Also, I can now add some extra Yomako farming, without worrying about it all getting stomped. And some more steam turbines to keep up with the expanding base. Now you might have noticed the research bar and thought to yourself, really? Rocket silo with this base? And yes, with Space Age's cheaper rockets, it's actually possible to launch rockets even with basically 4 yellow belts of resources. Also gonna slap a furnace stack in between my labs and science, since I'm gonna need lots more steel. But if I'm gonna be launching rockets, there's one ingredient I'm missing. So here's some sulfuric acid and blue circuits. Oh, and can't forget the space platform foundations that'll be eating up all my steel. Then I just sit around for 30 minutes waiting to get enough resources and finally build the rocket silo. Alright, well, that's Gleba completed. Video over, guys. See ya. Is what I would say if I was a coward. I'm sticking to the goals I've had for this whole series. So here's a very tiny space science platform. The smaller the better, since platform foundations are a bit too expensive for me right now. This whole thing can be built in like 8 rockets. Just one of those problems that you'd never have to think about if you're playing the game the intended way. And here are our first bottles of space science. The plan to solve all the Gleba problems I mentioned earlier is actually very simple. But first, let me landmine some more pentapod nests with my new power armor filled with exoskeletons. This actually makes it pretty easy. Alright, so I had a general idea before I even started the run that I would have to bend my rules a bit. I simultaneously have not enough coal, not enough stone, not good enough weapons, and not enough time to research enough to solve all those problems. But there is one way to fix all of that at once, by simply going to another planet. And technically, the rules only stipulated that I need to start on Gleba and have a base producing 90 SPM on Gleba. Nothing says I can't take a brief detour in between those two steps. Look at me finding loopholes in the rules that I came up with myself. Aren't I clever? Don't get me wrong, I don't feel good about this, but it is pretty much the only realistic way I came up with of completing this challenge. The next like 2 hours were spent waiting around for enough space platform foundations, so let's just skip to when the ship is done. This is just a slightly modified version of the ship I used in the Fulgora video, and oops, guess I forgot I have only 2 tiers of weapon damage and shooting speed. Let's try that again. More turrets and only 1 thruster this time. There we go, made it to Vulcanus. Now I did say this was just a brief detour, so I'm not gonna explain much of anything I do here in the video. But I know how to make time lapses now, so you get to enjoy one of those instead. Look at this beautiful mess of a base. It's nothing amazing, but for something thrown together in a few hours, it's good enough. I've also made a new and actually good spaceship. This will be the ship I use to transport coal, stone, and whatever else I need to Gleba. The whole idea with this trip to Vulcanus was to secure a constant source of coal and stone, and to get access to foundries to increase the efficiency of any ores on Gleba. And of course to unlock artillery, which is the best offensive and defensive measure against the pentapods. It also came with the nice benefit of getting things like green belts and cliff explosives. Alright, this is a Gleba video after all, so let's hop aboard the Gleba Express and make our way back with all the new toys. Well, old Gleba base, you did your job, but it's time for upgrades. I have robots now, but my only power source are personal solar panels. And solar power on Gleba is pretty bad, so most of the deconstruction ends up being by hand anyway. I guess it's fitting for this run. After way too long spent holding down right click, the old base is mostly cleared and it's time to rebuild. And going from blue inserters and yellow belts to bulk inserters and green belts is gonna be quite the upgrade in the fruit department. As always, the first thing you need in a Gleba base is bioflux production. And with having access to actually good belts, I don't need to worry about direct insertion anymore. Also, robots and longer underground belts make design so much less of a headache. Next is dealing with spoilage, but that's as easy as a filtered splitter or inserter at the end of every spoilable belt. And even with this build, making over triple the amount of bioflux as my old base, just a single bioflux to nutrients biochamber is enough to feed all of it. After that, bacteria cultivation. And this time I'm actually leaving a way for it to automatically restart itself. Just wire all the machines together and only enable the kickstarting recipe if none of them are currently working. Foundries to turn all the ore into molten metals, and using big mining drills I can get 50 stone out of these tiny stone patches. Vulcanus tech really is that good. Now let's take care of power generation. Biochambers don't use any electricity, so a Gleba base will need much less power than any other base of the same size. But I'm gonna be using modules and beacons in most builds, so I'll still need a decent amount of steam turbines. The only bio recipes I'm missing now are the oil products, so here's plastic and rocket fuel. The rocket fuel is especially important, since it'll be used to keep the heating towers running as well. Now before I turn the base on, there's one more problem to take care of. Those pesky pentapods. The problem with artillery usually is that natives don't appreciate their home being destroyed out of nowhere, and will rush towards whatever was responsible for said destruction. But their problem is that they aren't particularly smart, so if you just deconstruct your artillery and anything near the place where they were shot from, they'll just get confused and eventually leave. So after another round or two of this, any nest even close to my base is no longer a threat. After that's done, let's quickly kickstart the base. Luckily, there's plenty of spoilage laying around in chests from the previous one. I think I may have underestimated the sheer length of the nutrients belt. Oh well, it takes a bit longer than expected, but eventually it's all working. Since I'm shipping in coal from Volcana, I don't need to bother with that horrible coal synthesis recipe, so all spoilage will be going straight into heating towers. And shockingly, I don't have enough power, so let's employ the Factorio solution to everything and just double it. After all the bioprocessing is taken care of, it's time to start working on the normal materials. And like always, the first thing to make is circuits. With foundries, you can just set your circuits up like so, and this tiny build will be spitting out 60 green circuits per second. After that, we can instantly make red circuits as well. Just need 2 foundries making copper wire, but I get the feeling that food production won't quite keep up, so time to expand the farming area. I forgot about sulfur earlier, but making it is as easy as just tacking on 2 biochambers next to the spoilage belt. And with that sulfur, I'll make sulfuric acid and then blue circuits. Crazy how fast everything goes when you actually have some research done. Foundries make LDS very efficient as well, so just these 4 machines will be all we need. Now let's smelt up some bricks and then start on rebuilding the sciences. And even with the base quality tier 2 modules, this is all you need to make 90 SPM. The best part about foundries is that you can just have 2 pipes of molten iron and copper running for your base and just make every science material on site. Crazy that this little thing here will make more military science in like 5 minutes than I managed to produce in my first 10 hours on Gleba. And the rest of the sciences are pretty easy to make as well. Turns out a lot of the logistical challenge is removed when all you need to do to make almost any material in the game is route 1 pipe. And can't forget about the labs. But another thing I'll need is a better space science platform. So let's launch one up. It's still small enough to where it shouldn't take too long for it to build. And while waiting for that, let's take care of the last science pack, the Gleba specific agricultural science. The nice thing about this science is that it's very simple and needs very little throughput. Just 2 biochambers with no modules produce exactly 90 SPM. All I need to do is make sure I have enough pentapod eggs coming in to keep it running constantly. But I have the small problem that I bombarded every pentapod nest even remotely close to my base, so I had to go pretty far out to find an egg raft to get the initial egg I'll need to start the process. Also ran low on power again, so let's hope rocket fuel production keeps up. But once that's all taken care of and the space platform is built, that's every science pack automated to 90 SPM. One last thing before I can call this run complete though. Let's set up some artillery nearby the agricultural towers to keep any pentapod expansions well away from the spore cloud. So with all that, I can finally say that the dreaded Gleba run has officially been completed. Kinda disappointed that I had to go off planet to make it happen, but Gleba as a starting planet is such a massive jump in difficulty compared to any of the other 3 that I didn't see any other viable options. But hey, at least now I can say that I've successfully started on every single planet that's even theoretically possible to start on. Huh? What's that? There's a mod that lets you start on Aquilo now? No, no way I'm touching that. Nope. Anyway, thanks for watching dear viewers, and I hope to see you in my next videos. Oh, and I also made a Discord server, so if you'd like to chat with me, consider checking that out. Okay, see ya!